When angels pull rank. In Vietnam, angels can pull rank to save Christian missionaries. The Christian organization Voice of the Martyrs is teaming up with conservative multimedia network The Blaze, spawned by right-wing pundit Glenn Beck. In an exercise of anecdotal confirmation bias, Dr. Jason Peters, the vice president of Connection for the Martyrs, regales listeners with tales of the subtleties of God's modern interventions to sporadically rescue his unwanted missionaries bringing the gospel to various global hotspots. Among his offerings for the faithful is a story of a stranded missionary rescued from a Vietnamese checkpoint by a motorcycling police officer of a rank higher than ever seen in the area. Riding with this officer gave the missionary the chance to return home safely, whereupon the man was credulously assumed to be an angelic visitor. Apparently, angels are on duty within the Vietnamese police force, and listeners to The Blaze will not be encouraged to posit earthlier interventions for these, or other tales from 68 countries where the martyrs operate. The law enforcement angels were apparently unable to penetrate into Nigeria, where another missionary survived a head wound from Boko Haram terrorists for refusing to renounce Jesus. But where divine protection does not occur, the missionaries cultivate an attitude of forgiveness. You can't do that. Prominent Saudi Arabian journalist Alaa Brinji was sentenced to 5 years in prison for a series of pro-human rights tweets, according to a report by Amnesty International. On March 24th, the Saudi monarchy found Brinji guilty of insulting the rulers, inciting public opinion, ridiculing Islamic religious figures, and accusing security officers of killing protesters. Amnesty International says that Brinji, who has worked for several respected Saudi newspapers, is a prisoner of conscience, imprisoned solely for peacefully expressing his views. In 2014, Brinji set out a series of tweets in support of human rights advocates and calling for the right of Saudi women to drive cars. The repressive, theocratic Saudi regime governs according to an extremist, sectarian form of Sunni Islam known as Wahhabism, which denies women the right to drive or travel without being accompanied by a male guardian, and regularly beheads people for sorcery, apostasy, and drug possession. James Lynch, deputy director of Amnesty International's Middle East and North Africa program, said, "The sentencing of Alaa Brinji to a 5-year prison term is utterly shameful. He is the latest victim of Saudi Arabia's ruthless crackdowns on peaceful dissent. Putting someone behind bars for peacefully exercising his legitimate right to freedom of expression and defending the rights of others to do so is a complete distortion of the very notion of justice." Lynch added, "The authorities must ensure his conviction is quashed and release him immediately and unconditionally." Concerned pediatricians. For the second time in as many years, the Supreme Court is grappling with women's access to birth control against personal religious beliefs. At the crux of the issue is whether or not employers who are religiously opposed to contraception should cover it in their health plans. But Bernard Dreyer, president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, argues that this ruling has potentially dangerous implications, reaching far beyond just access to birth control. There's no discernible difference between a religious objection to contraception and a religious objection to a vaccine, says Dreyer. If the Supreme Court entitles an employer to be totally exempt from contraceptive coverage, it would presumably allow an employer to do the same for vaccination coverage. If Dreyer's fears are correct, a ruling in favor of religious employers could lead to a potentially deadly slippery slope. For example, a church-run school that objects to intrauterine devices could more easily say it won't fund a measles vaccine, cutting off many low-income families' access to the potentially life-saving vaccination. Some religions, such as Christian Scientists and the Dutch Reformed Church, have strict doctrines against vaccines. Under the Affordable Care Act, insurance plans on the individual and company level must fully cover vaccines, just like contraceptives. The law has technically ended out-of-pocket pay for these preventive services, though not all pharmacies and insurers have complied. The American Academy of Pediatrics filed an amicus brief earlier this year urging the court to consider effects far beyond the facts of this case. Future objectors, the document reads, could prevent children from obtaining crucial life-saving preventative care. Aside from the issue of access to medical care, this case brings up other important questions. What power should employers have over the private medical decisions of their employees? And does the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment essentially give religious employers the right to simply ignore laws they disagree with? Justice Sotomayor seems to be troubled with the latter question during oral arguments. If everyone who said laws violated their beliefs chose not to follow them, she said, how will we ever have a government that functions?